Okay, so in the next part of this tutorial, what we're going to take a look at is just to give you, as a teacher, a brief overview of the different types of activities on Mangahigh. We'll also discuss how you can actually find these activities in the teacher portal, and that way you can identify them easily and actually assign them to your students. So I'm going to show you how to assign the tasks as well. But before we get into it, just in terms of helping you understand the different types of activities and when to assign them, I'm going to have a look at the activities from a student's point of view. So here we are, we're in a student's account, and under the Assigned tab, you can see a list of activities that's been assigned by the teacher. Now, there are some games activities, and the way I can tell this is by looking at these sort of rich games looking graphics. Okay, you can click into it and that will again show you these rich games graphics, and that you can tell is a game activity. And if you scroll further down, if I close this, you'd see these blue icon. These are what we call prodigy activities, so they're the quiz activities. So keeping in mind, these are adaptive quizzes, which means questions get harder along the way for your students. So I'm going to take a quick look at a quiz activity so that you can see the types of questions your students get. But in the next video, we will actually go through the process of instructing your students on how to complete the quizzes so that they can be successful. Because it's adaptive, it does take a few goes. So in other words, your students are expected to attempt each task at least 3 times. Now, when we go into a quiz activity, we always see that it starts at the easy level, and progressively your students will get to the harder and harder questions. And what I mean by that is you need to get 3 in a row correct in order to move up to the next level. So here we are, we can see that we have attempted 2 easy questions right. It tells you that 2 easy questions are correct. And if we get the next question right, you'll move up to the next level. Okay, so progressively you'll get up to the harder questions, and eventually we want to get our students to a point where they can answer those extreme questions. Next, we'll take a look at some of the games-based activities. So the games is all about getting your students to be somewhat repetitive in the work that they're doing, but keeping in mind that, again, it's still adaptive, which means if your students are getting a series of questions right, the questions will eventually get harder and harder for them again. So all of the platform or across all of Mangahigh activities, you will expect some level of adaptivity so that your students are constantly challenged and effectively, be pushed and worked in their somewhat or slightly uncomfortable zone. So this game here is Flower Power, which is all about ordering fractions, decimals and percentages. All of these games are mapped to the curriculum of your choice. So depending on the curriculum that you're actually working off, the program will help you identify which game is suitable for that curriculum level that you're working with. So in this particular game, what we're doing is we're trying to organize a vertical number line with the largest number up the top and the smaller number down the bottom. And students will continue to do this up until the point where, they've mastered this level, and then harder flowers will come up. So in this case, let me quickly show you. If I order all 7 flowers in one stem correctly in the correct order, then the next flower that comes up will have harder maths associated with it. And that's the beauty of this whole process of using games or embedding games in your learning, where your students are progressively doing harder work without themselves really realizing it. And if they do realize it, that's completely fine as well. We talk a little bit about, dopamine spikes and getting your students excited and interested. And that's what helps your students advance as well. So you'll see that there are questions that comes up. So the yellow flower there is something a little bit easier. I'm just clicking through the instructions, but there will be instructions to support your students as well. But the idea here is the purple flowers have harder maths compared to the yellow flowers. And we go ahead and click through and organize them. So 1 1/4 goes up here, 1 lives here, and 1.75 should belong up there, and so forth and so on. So your students continue this process until the time runs out, and there will be games guides that we can share with you along the way as well. So if your students do get stuck on how to pass or how to really work through the game, then the games guides would actually support your students in doing it. So there is a variety of games, so your students, keep entertained or keep interested by trying out different games at different times of the year, depending on the topic that you're teaching. So this game that we're about to look into is called Deepest Ocean, which is all about the greater and less than, the inequality sign, basically. So we're operating this submarine with the number 5 on it, and we can say, yep, 5 is less than -8, less than 8. So click through, drag the submarine onto this fish, and grabs hold onto the correct inequality. So 5 is again smaller than -6, so we'll drag that submarine towards -6, and so forth and so on. Okay, so we want to avoid negatives, we want to avoid 0, but we can drag the submarine towards 10, less than 10. So 5 is less than 10, and we'll drag it towards 10. Okay, and again, in the spirit of adaptivity, as a series of questions, as you get a series of questions right, we get deeper into the ocean where we have more complicated maths problems to solve. So here we are, we're back at the teacher platform now. So what we're about to do is to actually show you how to assign the tasks to your students. Now, the first thing you want to do is to actually locate the activities. But before you do that is we want to make sure that you're actually assigning the tasks to the correct group. So by default, you tend to have your whole school selected on the top left-hand corner. Drop down, click on the menu and drop down and select the class that you actually want to assign the task to. A really nifty trick here is to click on that little star next to your class name, and what that does, it actually favorites your class, and that way the favorited classes will appear on your to-do on top of your list. That way all the other classes goes right down the bottom, and as a teacher, when you are assigning tasks repetitively to a particular class, because that's the class that you manage, then it's always nice to actually have them sitting on top of your list. Now, the next thing you want to do is actually select the class. So now you're saying to the system, right, I'm about to assign some tasks, and I'm going to assign the tasks to the 8A class, which is the class that I'm teaching. If you have any previous activities assigned already, it will show up here, so all the current activities. If you have any activities that you're assigning into the future, it will show up into the future assignments as well. Okay, so in this case, this class doesn't have any activities assigned to them, so let's go ahead and assign them. So the first thing you want to do is click on Assign. So it's pretty straightforward. Everything is organized based on the curriculum. There's a few different things you can do. You can use the search box and actually type in a search term. So for example, you might be teaching Pythagoras. And so what you need to do is you can click into Pythagoras or click into the search box, do a search on Pythagoras, and it brings up all of the activities related to that search term across the multiple year levels. Now, this is really great, especially if you are starting a brand new topic and you may want to start with some revision activities before you get into that whole curriculum level based activities. So as you can see here, there are some activities in year 9, some activities in year 10, which you can pick up and go ahead and assign to your class. Now, when you hit assign, what you'll find is that you have a start date and you also have a due date. Now, the start date by default is today, but if you are a super organized teacher and you'd like to be super organized, you can actually push back start date to week 2, week 3, week 4 of your term. So depending on how you'd like to manage your list. And once you have assigned a future activity and your class happens to be running ahead of time or ahead of schedule or behind schedule, you can always go back in and actually adjust the start or the due date as well. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as it is, as today, and your due date by default is 1 week from the start date. But again, depending on how you like to manage your class, I normally like to put it in for 2 weeks, and that way your students have time to go in and have a first go at it, as well as have some time to go back and do some revision work as well. Okay, so what I've done here is I've actually put it in there for 3 weeks, but again, you can go in and edit it so long as the due date has not come and gone. Okay, so if the activity that you have set is still active because it hasn't gone past its due date yet, you can go back in and assign the task or adjust the end date for your students. Now, at this point, you want to assign it to either all the students in your class. Now, if this was an activity that you are reassigning, so in other words, your students have done this before and you just want to reassign it to students who have not passed, you do have the option of clicking into the activity and say, just show me the students who have never passed, and all of these ticks will be pre-ticked for you for students who have never passed. You can also do this same thing by selecting students who have never attempted it. So what that means is these are students who in their the first time you assigned it to them, they didn't even give it a go. As opposed to students who have not passed as students who gave it a go but did not pass, okay? And of course, once you're happy with your selection, you click done. And once you've done that, that activity will appear immediately on your students' to-do list without delay. And you as a teacher, you can also see that it's now an active activity. Now, other ways of searching activities for your students. So we've done a quick search term. Okay, I'm just going to clear that. You can also see that activities are organised based on the curriculum of your choice. So let's just say I'm a Year 8 teacher. I am interested to see what else is in Year 8 under, say, number and algebra at the start of the year. And perhaps I'm interested in looking at number and place value. Okay, so here we have a list of activities that are listed for Year 8, number and place value. So blue icon, so similar to what you see on the Students tab. The blue icon, these are all the Prodigy or Adaptive Quiz activities. Go ahead and assign it to your students. Okay, remember to select the new due date if you don't want to do it in a week. And then again, click done. Okay, so it's nice and easy. How many activities do I recommend? I suggest assigning at least 2 to 3 activities per week. 2 quiz or Prodigy activity and couple that with a game activity. In terms of your school timetabling, also look at your timetable and actually identify perhaps a segment, really schedule in your time for Mangahigh. For example, I always advise teachers, let's just say Thursday after lunch, there's a maths lesson. That's your Mangahigh time, as an example. I think more importantly and more important than anything else, it's actually the routine. Have a habit of your students expecting to do Mangahigh on a particular day, particular time, and that just makes it a lot easier for you to implement for your students as well. The other aspect of building a habit also is that when you look at the reports, we'll do a module on reports in the intermediate level training session. But when you're looking at reports, if you think about it, the reports is only as rich and as wonderful as the amount of effort your students put into it. So if you start by setting a nice little habit for your students, setting some expectations and say, look, this should be done weekly or this should be done fortnightly. Frequency, while it's great, I think more importantly, again, it's the habit. Having some kind of regularity, that's really important for your students. Okay, because the reports will only tell you what your students are doing, and if your students don't put some time towards it, the report's not going to be really useful for you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 types of activities on Mangahigh. You'll see that there are number and place value games. So any of the games-based activities will sit under the games folder. Okay, but in terms of assigning it, it's nice and easy. Click into the activity just the same way as you assign the quiz activities. Click your due date, who do you want to assign it to, and then all the students as opposed to the students who have never passed, and click done. So it's the same process. You can start it into the future, you can start it tomorrow or just today by default. And again, same thing, if the activity is active, it will show up as an active activity for your students. And go ahead and assign as many as you like. But like I said, manage your to-do list, getting your students or having assigned, 2 or 3 activities on a weekly basis. That's plenty, and it gets pretty exciting for your students already. Now, just one last method to locate the activities to assign. So the assigning steps are exactly the same, but we've looked at the keywords. We also looked at the curriculum folders. So click on the plus to open it up and minus to close it. Or a third method is to just go into a filter. So click into the filters and you might say, I'm only interested in the games activity. So just click on games. And you might then say, look, I'm interested in games for all of the courses, or perhaps you might say I'm looking for games just for algebra, or you might be looking at games just for geometry. I think the main thing here is the idea that you can use a filter system to then help you identify the games available. Now, a bit of a word of warning. There isn't a game for every single aspect of the maths that you'll be covering, but you will find that there are games for supporting activities. So in other words, if your students are struggling with their times tables, for example, there will be games available for times tables. But more importantly, if your students are struggling with, let's just say, simplifying fractions, then, from a teaching point of view, you probably want to teach your students how to simplify fractions, but at the same time also make sure that they've got their times tables or the division skills spot on, okay? Because it's all related, factorization and so forth. So as a teacher, like I said, you can use the filter system and try and identify activities. And again, it takes you through to a list, which you can simply click into the activity and click assign. Okay, so I hope you find that useful. And next up will be a few questions for you to answer. And then I'll see you on the third video.